we actually have a really timely topic as the last one for the day. So we will be talking about flexible work, flexible working hours, and we will be starting with a presentation from our colleague from EIGE, Davide Barbieri. I want to lead in with just a thought, which I think flexible working time, when we started to talk about it already kind of a long time ago, early on in my career, and that's a very long time ago. And flexible work sounded like something really cool and positive and progressive. But when the time has gone, it actually has proven to be a little bit more complicated than that. In Finnish, and I apologize now for the interpreters, this will be difficult for you, but in Finnish we have this saying that it's susi lampaan vaatteissa, which translates into something like a wolf with sheep's clothes on. And now what we would like to do in this last session in the afternoon is actually figure out whether we are talking about a wolf or a sheep when we talk about flexible working hours. So I will pass on to Davide to give us the hint. And this is for you.
Okay. Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. I think you have already so many plans for tonight, to go home, to go, maybe also to pick up children, or to go for a dinner, and maybe someone has already gone taking a flight. Anyway, so I will go to the end of this day, leaving you to reconcile your life at the end of this day. So after this really tough day. I will quickly present you a few data on flexible working arrangement. And as they are defined in the way, also in the directive, in the way in which worker can, how much, where, and when they can work, they can perform their activity. No, this is the... Okay, I've chosen a clock because it's really relevant for me and for all of us in defining our way in which we are using time for work and for life. It's this really nice picture for me because it's gives me the idea that I can use my time in the way I want. And this is more or less the way in which also the directive is kind of defining the way we can use in which the directive defined the flexible working arrangement. There's been also kind of an overlapping also with something that has been said before. Maybe Cohen, maybe I'm mistaking the name, Cohen and Bjork, they used to describe a day for to take a one day for children sickness or something that are not actually parental leave, as much more related to flexible working arrangements. So in the way workers could take 1 hour off, a couple of days off, or a way to organize their working time, adjusting their needs to their proper need, singular need, and to the need of the family. And this is the definition that is included in the directive. Okay. Yes, I'm a bit lost now. Okay. Sorry. And, actually, I would like to introduce a few data saying a thing that we were thinking about this. Actually, flexible working arrangements are, in a way, not gender sensitive by definition, because in the majority, they were introduced on purpose to increase the participation of women to labor market. So they are actually not gender sensitive by definition. And there are a lot of negative impact also in assessing and taking up flexible working arrangement. First of all, we know very well that the overall employment rate for women, it's kind of that is less high than for men, specifically for women with children. And we know that this could be a consequence of the way in which the working environment do not allow that much flexible working arrangement for women and for men, of course. But this is an impact very high for the overall employment rate. I've just read a few days ago really recent data provided by Eurostat. They have just provided data on reconciliation, and they, in the new data last Friday, not included in the report still, about 100 million of people in Europe are taking care of children or elderly. 90 million of people are taking care only of children, and 52% are women, 40% are men. But if you look deeply in the data of employed people, the percentages are completely reversed. So 40% of people taking care of children are employed are women, and 40% are men. In a way, you could calculate the employment rate of women in caring responsibility for children, and it is kind of 70%, while for men is almost 95%. So a huge gender gap in employment rate when people has responsibility for children. And then we have, of course, also negative impact on financial issues, because women and men taking flexibility are penalized in a way, because working less hours could lead you less earning, less social security, less pension, and at the very end of your life you could have also be at risk of poverty, and this is affecting much more women than men at the end. And then there are another kind of there are other negative impact in the sense that work-life balance, work-life tension in reconciliation is strictly linked to gender stereotypes. Women and men use differently flexible working arrangements. There are several evidence that women use flexible working arrangement exactly in the way they are expected to do, so to reconcile work and family life, so to take care of household and children. While for men, there are cases of evidence that they use flexible on the opposite way, to work more, even to increase the tension between family and work. A few data. Well, no. Last question to you. I know that everybody already today has asked you so many questions, but taking into consideration this definition, I would like to ask you, how many of you has this kind of arrangement available in your place of work? But I want gender statistics. So first of all, women and then men, because there are differences, really strong differences. So first of all, how many women has the availability, not necessarily they can use it, but the availability of this kind of arrangement in your working place? Quite a lot, actually. We will see in the data that is probably, we are, as someone else said before, kind of, we are working in a privileged environment. For men, even though I suppose that the sample size of a man is not that much reliable here, but so how many, so, well, I cannot, well, quite a lot also, less, but because we are less, yes. So, in a way, so let's doing my job, I'm a statistician much more, so I'm providing all this data, so these are the figures at the EU level. 57% of women and 54% of men are completely unable to have any flexible working arrangement in their job. We are probably most of us will be in this 90% in the third part of the graph. That is, I'm lucky in the organization I'm working. I have, and between certain limits, the possibility to take flexi time. The other part is much more, I don't know what's happening here. Bernadette?
It's time to go home.
It's time to go home, yes. But probably in the right part, are concentrated the majority of self-employed or entrepreneurship, and then is much more man-dominated in a way. But altogether, 33% of women compared to 38% of men has a certain level of flexibility, or fully or partial possibility to have flexible working arrangement. This is the figures at EU level and member state level. Unfortunately, for technical reason, I cannot show you exactly the correlation between these figures and the gender equality index, but it's very clear for you. You see, Sweden, Denmark, Netherlands, Finland, Belgium, Austria, all the countries which higher gender equality index score are also the country in which the flexibility in working arrangement is higher, both for men and for women. And not only, but if you can see, the gaps are really small. So the countries in which their flexibility, availability of flexibility are higher for both women and men, gaps are smaller, and the gender equality index as a way to measure gender equality in the countries are higher. And so this is our first figures on overall. But there are differences in sector and in occupation. So the availability of flexible working arrangement in sector and occupation are really, really high. So, and these are a way to say that there is also a strict link to the segregation in the labor market. We know that around 1 in 3 women is working in a public sector compared to 1 in 5 of men. But in public sector, there are more or less the same possibility for women and men not to have and to have flexible working arrangement. On private sector is the opposite. When men are concentrated, there are much more possibility to obtain flexible working arrangement. Throughout occupation, again, there is very high differences. Well, in the manager position, women and men, in this case, the figures are availability of flexible working arrangement. So 66% of women and 68% of men have possibility as manager to have flexible working arrangement. But as you see in the low side of the graphs, you can see a small number, but just to tell you that this is the percentage of women involved actually. So only 4%, if I correctly remember, 4% of women and 6% of men are managers. So it's not a big amount of people. While if you see the other figures for professionals, for technicians, for clerical support, where women are much more involved, women are much more included, the availability is really, really different, and the gap is really, really high. So private sector, in which there are much more possibility to have flexible working arrangement, are penalizing women and advantaging men. Well, another important issue. So far, I've only talked about availability. So these are questions related to: if you need, can you have some flexibility? But there are not that much figure on really taking up, because on the other side, yes, men are much more. They have much more possibility to have, but they are also the one that they take less for flexible working arrangement. So women, the rate of taking up for women is much higher than that for men. And we have a couple of evidence. For example, in the use of part-time, you know that every one, considering the full amount of part-time workers, 1 is men and 4 are women in the EU. And but there is a trap in the part-time. So a lot of this is the figures for women, a lot of women still remain in the part-time, so the transition rate in the part-time is really, really low. 75% of women stay in part-time 1 year after the other, and only 14% are moving to full-time. And for men, it's exactly the opposite. So 28% of men, we know that men want to work percentage more than women increase their working hours. However, women are much more in part-time. So on a fully picture, women are much more penalized also in this case. And one of the final figures I will show you. This is the same figures I show you at the EU level. These are figures at country level. And the countries are grouped according to the level of part-time of women. So the first group is when the part-time of women is less than 15%. The central group is in which the part-time of women is between 15 and 35%. And the right side is when the part-time of women is more than 35%. And there is a clear picture, a clear understanding, even though there are also differences in countries, in how countries they implement national policies on part-time and on flexible working arrangement. But you can see in the left side, the majority of country, the transition rate for both women and men are much higher than for other countries. So when there are no people working part-time, the majority of people want to come back, want to work more. In the central part, it's a mixed, but again, in this case, the transition rate for men are much, much higher. And for countries, a small number of countries, I don't know why, okay, there are countries that are not visible here, but this one is Netherlands. That is the country in which, one of the countries in which the part-time rate for women are higher. So you see the transition rate for women in these countries is really, really low. Also, a lot of women are working part-time. It's much higher for men. This could depend on a couple of factors. There are evidence on a research based that in a few countries there are, for example, in the Netherlands, in which there are much more provisional of part-time, so you cannot even escape from part-time, even if you want to escape. In the majority in several economical sectors, there are trapped, and mainly female-dominated. There are not that much possibility to transform part-time into the full-time. And in other countries, for example, this could be also due to the difficulties in childcare provision. That could be not affordable, that could be not available for all. Finally, I try to give you some insight on how our gender equality index is related to the flexible working arrangement. In this case, for women, the flexible working arrangement for women, for both men and women, as I said before, there is a big correlation with the gender equality index per se. But we also try to connect flexible working arrangement availability with the domain. So it's not shocking to say that it's really connected with time domain. So the higher level of flexibility for women allow much more gender equality in the use of time. The same for money. So more flexibility allows also to reduce gender gap. To reduce mainly gender gap. It's not only gender gap, money domain, but this is a way to reduce inequalities in income and earnings. And then in knowledge as well. For men, again, time is the same. increasing availability for work, flexible working arrangement for men is increasing equality in time. And what is interesting for us, that it is also increasing power. So increasing in a way the possibility for women to enter into decision-making process. So flexibility for men increasing. There is a strong connection with our power domain. It's really interesting. And for money as well, of course, because again, there is still a connection with gender pay gap. Well, concluding remarks, maybe several things have been already said today, and I already said. So, generally, lower access to accessibility implies that actual work-life balance arrangements are not yet based on principle of equal opportunities. As I said, there is, by default, in a way, flexible working arrangements are not gender sensitive. There could be economic consequences, as I said, and then flexible working arrangements vary across occupation and job sector. So segregation is still an issue, also considering flexible working arrangement. And I would like to close saying that part-time, as I said, cannot be the only answer to reconcile work and life for women and men, and that all policies should be take into consideration and also other kind of flexible working arrangement in a way that they could be used from both men and women in different stages of their life, and that cannot be part-time as well, but flexible working arrangement as well, not only a permanent choice to be on the labor market. So, well, I will just leave you with my final statement, that is, yes, I would like to have a balanced work, a balanced home, and a balanced life. Thank you. Well done. Yes.
Thank you, Davide. I think we share that wish with you. I think we would all really vote for all that balance in our lives. That would be wonderful. Okay, but how shall we reach that? How can we use the flexible working arrangements to really meet the needs of the society and the different needs that we have? To discuss this, we have 4 interesting people. So we have Philippe Seidel, who is a liaison officer for the European Parliament from the EIGE platform, which is a network for older people. Please join me here on the stage. Welcome, Philippe. Then we have, yeah, let's give a hand to Philippe. Then we've got, Juliane Beer, who is the head of trade union policy from the European Trade Union Federation, ETUC. Then I would like to welcome Rebekah Smith, who is a Deputy Director of Social Affairs, Business Europe. And also we have a private sector representative, which is great, Elke Heitmueller, Head of Diversity Management at Volkswagen. And I would also like to invite Davide and Vincent to join us. And Vincent will be keeping an eye on the Twitter, so if you still have some Twitter energy, feel free to send out questions, and we will take them on as much as we can. Okay, I can put this down now. So we were hearing very interesting perspectives to work-life balance from the working hours perspective, and what that actually can mean and not mean, and whether it's a good thing or a bad thing or a fair or unfair, and it seems that it's a really complex matter to discuss. I thought that maybe we could start this discussion about just addressing the challenges, the pitfalls, the kind of the things that with the years we've seen that it's actually making the flexible working time cause problems to to people in Europe. And I therefore wanted to actually ask Elke to start, because she has got a really interesting insight to this topic at Volkswagen, where they actually decided to reduce the flexibility of working hours with an aim to improve the well-being of their staff. And it must have been a little bit of a process to get that through. Maybe you can tell us a bit on the discussion you had. Can you pass on the microphone? Yeah.
Yeah, first of all, thank you for inviting me to this very impressive conference. And I think I learned a lot today. And I have new ideas what I can realize in my company. That's very good. I think my task is to report from the practical experience of everyday business in my company. And this time, I'm very happy to be a part of Volkswagen management HR, responsible for the HR changes, because VW at time and all the automotive industry is facing one of the greatest challenges in its history. And so the people's business is very important. That's the good news. People are even more in the focus of attention these times. And it will become more important to hire the best employees, to retain the specialists, to motivate the staff to work together. And a very, very important point for us is although the health of the employees. And all this is very important, or all this pays in work-life balance attention. To anticipate it, no, flexible work arrangements are not the answer of all challenges we have, not of all. But I think it's one of the most important points because for us as an international company, it's very important to be a very attractive employer. And I think all the people, the specialists, the performer, they have a look of the working environment. And work-life balance is also for not only for women, also for all the young men, a very important point. And I think we Volkswagen have a lot of good rules to live work-life balance and flexible working time. We have a human weekly working time. I don't know if you know it. In Germany, our employees work 35 hours a week. That's in the most of the companies are like a part-time. And we have trusted work time. They can decide what time they work, and we have a very open agreement for mobile working time. You can decide by yourself the place you work and the time you work. And we have a re-employment commitment. You can break the working time. And I think that's the most discussed thing all over the world is we have for the protection of employees the email function of the smartphones will be deactivated at 6:00 p.m. and at all Sundays and so on. Okay, I think you're very happy about this, but at the day we communicated this. My son was a student, and he gave me a call and he said, "Are you completely crazy?" Because he was very motivated to work and to decide by himself, and he hasn't the experience that it's maybe not so good to work 24 hours around the clock and to be available and so on. And so the younger people in my company are not very happy about this rule. But the older, they enjoy it, or they respect it. And but we have a lot of things, but despite of all these offers, we have two big challenges. And the first one is the blue-collar stuff. All the regulations are more difficult to implement them in the at the working lines and in the 3-shift systems. And we work on it, but it's not perfect. And the second one, and that is also a cultural question, is the leadership decides whether it works or not, all these flexible offers. And they decide if it's neutral or bad for your career. And I think we have the rules in our company, or we have a lot of good rules. But the question is, how can we live it, and how can we realize it for every employee in our company without any negative influence to their careers? Mm-hmm. And that's the challenge. We work on it, but it's not easy. It's not a revolution, because it's a consequent and sustainable work needed in this topic.
Thank you. I'm sure Volkswagen is not the only employer who is thinking about these things, and I understand that you kind of looked really in depth to it. But I was wondering, Rebekah, do you have a perspective from the employer side in general? Is flexible working hours something which is seen as a matter that the employer should address in order to protect their employees?
Yes, certainly. I think. I mean, first of all, of course, it's always good to hear from the concrete company examples, but I think it's also important to look, like you said, broadly across the business community. And we do see an increasing number of companies now being interested in flexible working arrangements, and it's been the case for some time. I think, building on what was said in terms of the index, I think we would agree a lot of it comes down to usage, because it's true that flexible working arrangements are gender neutral. So depending on how they're devised, whether it's done, again, within a company where there's a kind of culture to deal with, to have flexible working arrangements and how they're used, then I think that has a great influence on the impact they have, and whether they're used, as was said, sometimes they are used for work-life balance means, and other times they're used more for sort of performance management, career progression, and we do see that also. But I think it's important to recognize that, whether a company has the possibility to introduce flexible working arrangements, of course, depends very much on the size of the company, on the sector they're operating in the kind of tasks that are in the company. As you said before, there's a difference between the white and the blue-collar workers. For some jobs, it's much more difficult to simply say, if you want, you can work from home today. Of course, we know for some occupations it's just not possible to do that, and for others it's much easier. So I think it's always important, as you've done in this part of the index, to break it down by sector, by occupation. And also by size of company, because, of course, investment in these kind of practices is important, and we see a benefit often for the company, for the productivity of the company, but at the same time it can have a cost. And okay, we want to talk less about costs, but I don't think we should ignore that fact either. And what I mean there is there's an organizational, I wouldn't call it a cost, but there's an organizational aspect to this. You know, you have to be able to manage different flexibility schemes or working time schemes. I think particularly in smaller companies, you know, you can have very complicated schemes with this person is here that hour, another person a different hour, and you have to be able to manage that in a way that it works for your company. That's why we don't think there's a kind of one-size-fits-all approach for this. So I think it's possible. And a lot of companies are interested in doing this. A lot of workers are also obviously interested in having these kind of flexible work arrangements. But for us, it's much more effective if it's done at the company level, depending on the industrial relations system. Of course, that can be done in collaboration with the trade unions, with the workers' representatives, with HR, with the line managers. There are also examples of companies doing this, you know, alone outside social dialogue forms. But I think for us, there has to be this kind of joint approach. So it has to work for the worker or workers concerned, but it also has to work for the company in terms of, you know, business continuity, running their company productively and, you know, meeting the demands that they have, whether it's from clients or provision of services, etc.
Mm-hmm. I will come back to you, Juliane, in a minute. But I wanted to ask Philippe, maybe from the perspective of the older generation who are still active in their own working life, and then maybe also then take care of their older parents. Is this a possibility for say part-time or flexible working arrangements? Is it something that you are seeing as a good thing, or kind of putting an additional burden to?
It depends. Is this working? Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. From our perspective, so you see maybe not a not so old worker here, but I represent HPAT from Europe. So we are an organization of older people's organizations. When I started working for EIGE, I was actually surprised that work-life balance was such a huge topic around employment for older workers. Because the first association you have around work-life balance is parents with children. So it is extremely important to our members. One, of course, because of care responsibilities. There's about 1 in 5 older workers who has some care responsibilities and who takes them up. It has to be said that the gender gap is a bit lower than when it comes to childcare, when it comes to elderly care, but the intensity is different. So many older women who are taking up care responsibilities are taking many more hours and many more physical tasks actually in care than older men do. But it is crucial for older workers to be able to maintain their employment relationship, because what's often not so much looked at is that there's many older people who have to stop working entirely because the care needs are so heavy. And this is where it links into the discussions that we had before around investment in infrastructure and care services more specifically. Flexibility in working time is extremely important and can very much work and be a driver for employment of older persons if there are care services that back that up. Because otherwise, there's no use of being able to take an hour or 2 per week for being flexible and like going to a doctor's appointment with your parent or whatever. If your parents are not taken care of the rest of the time, and if they're not supported in their independence the rest of the time. So it's really a link. You cannot have the success of flexibility measures without having measures on long-term care. Another aspect that's maybe less linked to gender equality, but linked to the to how we deal with aging, is that flexibility measures can also be a driver for longer careers. So you also have workers who might want to reduce their working time towards the end of their career, in order to be more capable to have to work even beyond retirement age or to stay longer in the labor market. And that's very important. It's different than the question of care. And when we talk about flexible measures, I think most of the time now we're talking about the flexibility measures that are in the Work-Life Balance Directive that are specifically for parents and carers. But this aspect is very important as well.
Okay, thank you. Juliane, I know that ETUC is very, very supportive of the working life arrangement concept in general, but I guess in your conversations you have also addressed the possible dangers or pitfalls it would have for employees. Can you share some thoughts?
Yes, of course. Thanks a lot for your question. And I think that I'm the first trade unionist who take the floor. So if you allow me for 2 general comments before I will make these 2 comments first, and then I reply to your question. So first of all, about the work-life balance initiative of this conference, congratulations. Not only because of the topic, but because it's really the timely moment to address it. Congratulations to your initiative. And why? Of course, we could say, I'm a trade unionist, I lobbied for the Work-Life Balance Directive. We could say, okay, now we have the directive, it's done. No, it's not done. It's not done because now we have to transpose and to implement the directive, and it's surely a big challenge. And that's what we saw during all the panels today. There are positive elements. There are minimum standards, but we see the disparity between the countries for the reasons which were explained, and we also see that we can do more. So that would be my first message, and it's the time where I do my little promotion exercise. So next week we'll have a big conference on the topic of rebalance, including, of course, the topic of this panel. And here I have with me a toolkit, a guide of the transposition of this directive. And I take this opportunity to thank the 2 experts who helped us, and both of them are in the room, Barbara Elferich and Paula Franklin, because, one of the speakers said, oh, okay, I don't know what the commissioner will do. I can tell you, I know what the trade unionists will do. So we will follow this toolkit. We will, of course, lobby for the directive to be transposed and implemented, and we will also lobby for more, because you know that there are existing consolidation of existing rights in this directive, like parental leave. I refer to the previous panel. No need to come back to that, even if it's the outcome of a social partners agreement, and also new rights, not the directive, but the initial directive on parental leave, new rights on paternity leave, on carers leave, and on flexible working arrangements. So that's the different things where we should build on and work a little bit more. You all said that for example, no, I'll not come back to that. I don't have enough time. Sorry, I'll stop there. Another general comment, and it was when we discussed with a few colleagues during the break. I think that in the discussions we had during this day, there was one aspect which was not really addressed: equal pay for work of equal value. What do we mean by equal value? How do we define that? And of course, when we address work-life balance, we cannot ignore that element. I come back to your question, which was
Thank you.
the position of ETUC, of course, on flexible working arrangements. Yes, we are in favor of flexible working arrangements. That's the glass half full. I'm a positive person. I'll start with that. ETUC is, of course, in favor of flexible working arrangements. It is described in the directive, so now it's positive. We have the right for parents to request this arrangement, and it has been extended to include working carers. But the directive has failed to grant the right for flexible working time, and instead the directive just provides for the right to ask for it. So this is in the directive where the progress should be made. For us, flexibility in working arrangements is there to ensure policy coherence between leave provisions and workers, greater control, and that's a key word, control and choice over their working time, and also enabling workers to structure their working time around their needs is completely fundamental. Where are the buts? And the buts were expressed in your presentation. So first of all, they shouldn't reinforce gender-based practices. Social protection as well as pension rights should not be negatively affected by such temporary working arrangements. And also family-related leaves and flexible working arrangements should be combined with availability, affordability, accessibility, and quality of childhood education, which is also one key aspect. Last comment about the barriers would be certainly on part-time, and it was addressed in your presentation, but also in the different panels. It is also an aspect which is really, really important, because part-time can lead to gender pay gap and can lead also to pension gap. And this is really an aspect that we would like to avoid, and you know, the rebalance aspect of it is key. I'll stop here. There are other questions, I'm sure.
Thank you very much. I think we've got a question from Twitter, Vincent.
Yes, we got a couple of questions, and it seems that the audience, they're very interested in very concrete examples of measures. For example, one person asked, what about shorter working hours as a standard for everyone? Another user asks, what would be innovative measures other than parental leave to help work-life balance? For example, the example Elke brought on switching off emails after 6 was also well received on Twitter. So it looks like there is this interest in very concrete ideas that have worked that we maybe can take home with us.
Do you want to? Juliane first, and then Philippe.
Yeah, thank you. I was the last, I'm the first. That's the way we balance, in fact, panels between social partners. That's perfect. Time as well. I'm the only one, so I should be careful. So yes, about what you said, you know, the fact that we can switch off our mobile phone, we call that the right to disconnect, basically. And we are really working hard on this topic right now. I cannot share all our secrets. Why? Because in June, with our dear colleagues from the employer side, Business Europe, SIP and UAPME, we started a negotiation on digitalization. And the secret is not that the right to disconnect is a key priority for trade unions, and I'm so pleased that it came from an employer at this round table, and congratulations for your concrete case. I'll use it during the negotiation for sure. It is really important. Why? First of all, because it has an impact on work-life balance, and you just mentioned it in this question, and it's really important that, you know, we are not obsessed by being connected all the time. You said that it can be different for the younger generation. I'm not sure. You know, when I see what I'm experiencing myself with 2 children, well, I'm not so young, but I'm not so old, and I can tell you that it's really important that we also realize that, and it's first of all an awareness-raising issue, because the younger generation is probably not aware of the impact of the fact that we are all the time, all of us, connected. Work-life balance is one aspect, working time, of course, but health as well, you know, and this is also very, very important to address that. So, of course, this should be taken into account when addressing flexible working arrangements.
Philippe, other concrete
cases.
Solutions.
A couple of things. One is on the organizational aspects that have already been mentioned. It has a cost, as Rebekah was mentioning, to have flexible working arrangements working. It has a cost for the employer, but it also has a cost to the employee. And there might be some gender bias as well about who asks for these kinds of measures and who feels legitimate to ask for these kinds of measures. And you might have an effect where maybe men feel more comfortable about asking for things, like you have often in other kinds of negotiations around salary or these kinds of things, because they might be more assertive around that because of stereotypes and things like that. So this should be borne in mind. And also often there might be on paper flexible working arrangements available, but it's so complicated to ask for them because you have to, I don't know, maybe ask 2 weeks in advance for permission whether it's okay at this point of time, that it's not flexible anymore. That it's essentially like a rigid negotiation of when are you available, when are you aren't. So there should be an element of life of this. I mean, it's work-life balance is needed because life is inherently not foreseeable. And so a kind of this element should be in there as well. So in terms of organization, of course, it has to work for every employer. I want to make a comment because you mentioned health from a different perspective, which is my perspective of being a young father. Flexible working arrangements are, I feel, extremely crucial because by law, men are not pregnant. So women are pregnant. Women have a right to go to doctor's appointments. Women have a right to be protected in their employment relationship before giving birth, have a right to be protected after giving birth. But giving birth is not something that you do alone. You need to be accompanied. There's, of course, a lot of qualified health professionals that are there to do this for you. But at the end of the day, in a certain moment, you come home and you have drawn all your rights for home visits of midwives, etc. And you're sitting there and you need support as a woman. And being prepared for that moment, also during the pregnancy as a becoming father, is extremely crucial. And for me, at least, flexible work arrangements were crucial to prepare this kind of moment and to really be, to fulfill your duty as a father. You're no longer only a worker. You have a stronger role, and you need to be prepared for this. And being able to go to midwives' appointments and things like that before the birth was crucial. And I think this is intrinsically linked to women's health, to mothers' health in terms of, there's postpartum depression, there's all kinds of physical things you can have. I guess the mental health effects of birth are not necessarily accessible or measurable, but I think this is really crucial as a measure.
Okay, I think we are moving now on to actually the need for flexible working arrangements and the benefits it can bring to us. And I'm wondering if we have any questions here in the audience that you would like to raise at this point before we move on. We've got one over here. And there is another one there. Okay, so we will take these two at this point.
Thank you. Rina Malta. I was wondering a question to Volkswagen, Elke, please. Is management also disconnected? Thank you.
Please use the microphone. Yeah.
Excuse me. No, the management is not disconnected, but I think that's right because we have a contract, and we can decide by ourselves which time we work. And my person, I have a team with a lot of young people, men and women, and they all have children, and they work very flexible. And I'm a role model for them. And when I have time, I can work at home. I can practice mobile work. That's also available for all of the management. And it depends on the leadership model, if you do this or not. But if you do this, then the team will follow you, and then they will find their own way to have a good work-life balance. And I think we need more role models for this in the management for the flexible work time. And we have to leave this it's like a Glaubenssystem, a religion. It's like a religion that only the people who stay on work over many hours are good workers, and they create value. That's not right. We have to have a look on the value in the time you work. And then the most of the leaders in our company said the part-time worker work in a very value way. And so we have to. I think we have to care for more awareness of these good experiences, because the most of the people do it in the way they learned it, and they haven't the experience how can it work in another in another way. And so what I like to say is we need a selection of solutions for flexible work time, because not one fits for all. We need solutions for the blue collar. We need, but also very flexible solutions for the white collar. And one thing fits for one people and not for the other. And I think let me say it in another way. We have one experiences in our company in Sweden with Scania. And they have alternative working hours, and they have rules like and they try to realize not to have meetings after in the evening and so on. And I think these are good. These are good proposals to realize this and to try it. Not everything works in every department, but you have to try it and to find your way to find more flexibility, so that the business runs in the same way. Or in a better way.
There were many good points there, but it's interesting what you're saying, that actually the flexible working time doesn't apply for the managers, because that's opposite to what Davide was showing in the statistics, that actually it's mostly the managers who have the most opportunities for flexible working.
No, that's the same time what I say. We haven't a rule for the management, but we don't need a rule for the management, because the management can decide by themselves when and where they work.
Okay. And Rebekah wanted to
Thank you. I don't want to have a negotiation here in this in this room. We have enough to do, and I'm not allowed to anyway, or we'll get told off if we start telling you what we're negotiating. But I would like to come back to this issue of I won't say right, but disconnecting or the possibility to connect, because that's also sometimes an issue. I mean, it won't surprise you when I say that, I mean, for us, this isn't about creating a rule. And actually, I personally believe in that, because I think it would be much more effective if people actually can develop the skills to deal with this themselves, not because they're obliged to switch their phones off, but because they actually believe they should switch their phones off. And I don't think that only goes for work. That also goes for outside of work. We're all victims of this and probably all spend too much time on screens. But from the employer's side, it's much more about giving people the skills, the competence, the ability to deal with that, rather than setting a rule for it. And in terms of the solutions, I don't think there is a kind of magic silver bullet to this. I think flexible working practices are one thing, but I'd like to come full circle to what was said right at the beginning of the conference. I think if we want to have if I use the word more balanced use of flexible working arrangements, it comes back to all the issues that we were discussing at the beginning. It comes back to stereotypes. It comes back to gender roles. You can have all the possible flexible working practices, leave arrangements you want. If at home or in society or in your culture there's a general belief that it is the women's job to do that, then it won't make a difference. So I think for us, I mean, without getting too political, with the current commission, because we're still just under the current commission, there has been a lot of focus on leave, on the work-life balance directive. But for the next commission, we really want to get back to these issues of gender segregation, gender stereotypes, combating role models, because if things aren't improving, and maybe we will see improvements, maybe we'll see disadvantages with the work-life balance directive. We don't know. We'll have to look at the impact of that. But irrespective of that, if we're moving and we have the minimum rights, but the situation is not improving quickly enough, then we have to look at those issues, and we're missing a trick somewhere. And I think those are really the key issues, and for us, they should be tackled with the next commission. I know it's not easy, because a lot of these issues come down to how you, as an individual, based on the society that you operate, based on the workplace that you operate, what you value and what you want to do. And I think that's very difficult to tackle at a European level. But I think we have to try, because somehow with the actions that are being taken, we're not getting to those root causes of the gender equality or lack of gender equality.
Thank you. We had one more question that that question is gone, probably answered already. Yeah. Okay, so we have a space for one question if somebody has something on their mind.
There's one in the front.
There is one. Okay. Here in the front, if you can bring the microphone here.
Thank you so much. Very fascinating panel, and I was specifically happy to see Volkswagen's participation here this afternoon, because I do believe that there's a huge role for the private sector to actually play to get us to the level where we might want to be with our gender equality index in a few years, because at the end of the day, it's the private sector who makes a lot of difference for their employees and their communities at the same time. And so I was wondering if you could share maybe from your experiences how your work might influence the private sector, or how you work with the private sector, as well as on the business case for the private sector. I work with the International Finance Corporation, which is part of the World Bank Group, working with private sector to increase women's labor force participation. And one of the things that we found, for example, in Jordan was when there was a call for maternity leave and children, provision of childcare from the private sector mandatory. The private sector initially very much hesitated, but then there was a business case when they realized that they actually were able to attract and retain women much better. And to the topic of men then also wanted to come in and benefit, and they also were able to do that. So just wanted to hear the private sector perspective a little bit more broadly, if you can. Thank you.
Anybody wants to reflect on that, the cooperation with the private sector, and how we can learn from the practices that have been tried out in the private sector? Rebekah, do you want to?
Yeah, I could talk about maybe not cooperation with the private sectors. Otherwise, I'm talking about cooperation with myself, but that's a bit strange. But about the private sector role here, I mean, at the moment, one of the big issues that we hear when we speak to companies is labour and skilled labour shortages. So for us, it's a bit of a no-brainer. We have to get more people on the labour market, and of course there's an untapped potential in terms of getting more women on the labour market. So, I mean, it's part of a bigger picture. It's not just about, giving women the possibility to be economically dependent, for empowerment, etc. It's also, I think there is a business case simply to getting more women on the labour market, because, I mean, despite the fact that now the economy is doing better, we miss people in companies. Then I think, the business case depends very much on the space that is left for companies to devise their own solutions, and also social partners to devise their own solutions at different levels. So for us, of course, we have minimum standards at European level, but we also need to leave space for tailor-made solutions. It comes back to the argument on there's no one size fits all. And then I think, we do also, I don't know if Juliane wants to touch on that, but we also deal with this issue quite a lot as social partners. We have our own work program. We have a gender toolkit that we've developed as social partners. So I think the social dialogue also has an important role to play here. Yeah, Philippe? Maybe.
Just to complete about what European social partners do on that. So first of all, in 2002, we signed a framework of actions on gender equality, and this toolkit that we have together with the employers is a way to identify practices at the company level on the 4 aspects of this framework of action, so stereotypes, gender pay gap, etc. And this is what we intend to do next year, in fact, to work on that together, as well as a seminar on childcare. That's also another related joint work that we have. That's it.
Okay, Philippe, maybe you want to ask. Yeah.
Can we just leave there? I want to actually underline what Rebekah said about the business case and the skills shortages. It's also a question of preparedness, because we have a demographic change which is underway. I don't have the statistics for 50-plus working age people, but the number of people 65-plus will increase by a third over the coming decades until 2050. The same is true as with the share of workers that are in the spectrum of older workers. So there will be more and more workers who will need some kind of flexibility, either because maybe they have started to develop some health issue themselves, or their partner has, or their parent has. So there we come to the question of care leave. And there's another effect which is often not talked about, which is the distance between the generations is changing. So while in the past you would have someone who is just about a young retiree, so around 60, let's say 67, would have a parent in their 80s, 90s, because the generations were very close together by that time. So we said so it would be retirees taking care of their parents. Because the generations are shifting further apart, it's now more people in their 60s who are in that case, and in the future it will be people in their 50s, maybe even in their 40s. And so it's not, we're talking about, there's this expression of the sandwich generation, which designates older persons who take care of their own parents and their grandchildren. Well, in the future, it might be people having to take care of their children and their parents. So we are putting together generations. So actually the pressure on families is increasing because of demography. And having flexibility measures and having measures around childcare in place and that are functioning is crucial to be prepared for that, especially for the private sector who is struggling to find skills. I stop here.
Thank you very much. We will need to start closing the panel because we are reaching the time when we really need to consider the work-life balance and respect the timing we have set for the closing of this conference. But I have just one quick question to all of you, where I would like to have just really quick, short reflections. We've been talking a lot about the importance and challenges of work-life balance, and I can understand that it's a matter that is being discussed in many forums, and there are toolkits available, and all that is really important. But is there also a gender dimension in these discussions? Are we making sure that this flexible working arrangement is not leading to women being pressured to work shorter hours, sacrifice their careers, and take care of the caring duties, which increasingly will be the reality in Europe in the coming years? Just very quickly, is this something that is part of your discussions when the working arrangements are discussed?
I will start because I see it in a positive way, because for us it was the entrance to the man, to address the flexible work. And so we can transport the gender dimensions and the quotas and all of this, because I think it's a success factor for all the gender equality, not only to talk about quotas and work-life balance for families and so on. We have to address it in a wider way. Okay. And so it was a success factor.
Thank you very much
for our topic.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've spoken about that for the whole panel almost, so I think it's clearly an issue. But again, it comes down to the use of these kind of schemes, which comes back again to all the issues we've been discussing all day, to gender roles and stereotypes. But I already spoke about that. So.
Yes, so two words to conclude. Your question is fully right. And it's also the question of the panel in a way. It will work only if it will be voluntary, it will be reversible, and it will be taken equally by men and women. So, of course, it has a gender dimension there, and it should be kept in our discussions.
I subscribe to most of this, but The factor that you outlined, that it's measures that mainly concern men, concern men rather than more than women. I wouldn't necessarily say that it's a failure of these policies if more men than women are benefiting from that, because, as I said earlier, it depends what it's being used for. And if men are using this to take up a caring role, given the structures that we have with different incomes between women and men, that men are more encouraged to continue working by the structures and the legislation that we hear. I'm not that much in agreement with Rebekah, who said that legislation is maybe not what we need, but we do need it because it changes perceptions as well and the roles that you have at home. So given this context, having more flexible working arrangements taken up for family duties by men shows that they are taking a stronger role in families. So I think we can interpret this as a success, even if it's not a perfect success, because it's not equal between women and men.
Thank you very much. With these words, I would like to thank you, our panelists, for this very dynamic conversation. It was not a negotiation, it was a discussion, and I think very many important points were brought forward. Thank you very much.